Awesome. All right. So, tonight's challenge or exercise in class, I'll pop it in the Zoom chat, is going to be working on this mute button challenge, where we're basically just going to put in a simple button, any nice, cute little UI. We're going to learn how to handle events, and also something that's really crucial is learning how to use SVGs. So, has anybody here encountered SVG images before?
Yes, and it looks like they have their own code.
Yeah, pretty much. So, Kasib, since you have run into them, would you mind telling us a little bit about maybe where you've seen them or how you would define them if somebody asked you?
I don't even know what it stands for, but it's just something I encountered trying to learn more about front end, just CSS, and I ran into SVGs and saw that I could just been messing around with them, saw that I can change the colors in the file by just change to like another hexadecimal color code. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. You can't do that with PNGs or JPEGs.
Pretty much, yeah. So SVG stands for Standard Vector Graphics. No, scalable vector graphics. And this is basically every single icon on the web ever uses SVGs. So like when you go to like google.com and you see like the little Chrome or like G icon, that is an SVG. If you go to GitHub and you see the little adorable cat at the top left of your window, that is also an SVG. If you go to make a React project and you get that little React funny looking atom icon, that is also an SVG. And that's the main use for our purpose of SVGs is basically 2D icon. Now, as Cassie mentioned, you can access and edit SVGs really easily because SVGs, unlike PNGs and other stuff, are literally stored in text files. So it's not a PDF. I think it's an XML file, but you can put it into Word or Excel or another program and manipulate the data inside it and change the hexadecimal values and scale it up and down. You can change it from pixels to raster or to vector graphics. And there's a lot of fun stuff we can get into with SVGs, which today is not the day for that. But if you want to do that for your personal project and make cool icons, that would probably be something you might want to dive into. But basically, all we're going to do is use SVGs as icons. So let's go ahead and get started on today's stuff. So first off, has everybody cloned the repo that I popped in the chat to their local machines?
I just did so.
Okay, cool. I'll give everybody a couple more seconds. And in the meantime, I've just got my VS Code open. Do that one more time. That was weird. All right, screen sharing. Beautiful. Okay, so also full disclosure, today's lecture is going to be entirely based off of the Delta evening and weekend like module material for today. There's no changes from that. So if you'd like to follow along faster or on your own now or later, we're basically going to walk through exactly that. All right, so once you all have everything cloned down to your VS Code, the first thing that we're going to do is CD into your repo and create a new React app in there. I just called mine app up here. You can call yours whatever you like. And that might take a minute or two. So I'll give everyone small amount of time to do that. And then after that, we can jump into stuff. So let's maybe here, I'll pause the recording for like a minute and let everybody get that done. So once maybe like 6:46 or 5:46, once everybody has the React app made, we can come back together and continue. Awesome. So hopefully everybody now has the React app started. And let me go ahead and share my screen. And just screen this guy. That's perfect. Drag you over here. Awesome. All right. So can everyone see the React app now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, I'm gonna just make this a little smaller. All right, that's a little better. So the first thing that we want to do is go to our app.js page, which should be inside app, then source, and then app.js. And then after that, the next thing that they suggest that we do is change this to be class-based components instead of functional components. So would anybody like to very briefly summarize the difference between class and function-based components and why or when we might want to use one over another?
Older version of React, perhaps.
That could be one of them. But first off, let's just go back and circle to the basics. So what is the difference between functional and class-based components in any language, especially JavaScript?
I mean, I guess when you're needing an instance, you would use a class, or you need some sort of instance. Like I guess there's certain things like model form that uses instances, and certain things you need instances.
Yeah, pretty much. So when you have something that's an instance, you generally want to use class-based, but also function-based are nice because sometimes they can appear to be a little bit more readable. Also functions, as seen here, the function has to return a value. Passing props between class-based and functional components is a little different, etc. So there are some fundamental differences between each of these. We're not going to discuss this in too much detail now, but for today, we're going to focus on changing this from the app function, as seen here, to a class-based component instead. So how can I go about doing that? So what's the first thing I need to do in order to create a class-based component in React?
Don't we import was it capital R React from React in quotes? That's kind of what it usually.
Import React from, and the folder I think should just be React. And we'll put our semicolon in there. All right, so that's step one. We want to import React. Why do we want to import React, if you remember?
Don't we have to call it with React okay, I've seen here. Yeah, class app extends React component. So call it, we have to import it. Or to call that library, we have to import it.
So we want to do class app extends react dot component. All right, so that, and again, the function is going to be deleted pretty soon here. We're just keeping that just so we can copy things over. All right, so remember how I said that functions have return values? Well, what do class-based components have instead of returns?
I think that render, the render function.
Render. Yep, exactly. So we're going to do render, have it not take in anything, and then inside of our render function is where we can put in our return. Go return here, and I'm just going to copy over the HTML from that page because it's probably easier than handwriting the whole thing. And we can now delete this. Is there anything I'm missing in the app class so far? Okay, actually, that was a little bit of an unfair question. If we go back to the README here, we see that this mentions that we are trying to create a UI that has a mute button. If we go back to the app.js, do we have anything within our app class that could potentially relate to a mute button at this time? Not really. So because of that, we need to, I should probably get closer and up the microphone volume. I just realized this is really low. Okay, is this a little bit louder?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So instead of setting up like a variable outside here, what we can do instead inside of our app class is create a state. And to do that, basically just state equals, and then that'll house basically a dictionary of whatever state variables you want. And for us, for example, we can call our state variable is muted. Now, when somebody loads onto the page, they're going to be faced basically with whatever is in this render function. And the state of the page on load is going to be whatever is inside of the statement. So if I say is muted equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example, which you're not really supposed to do, but hypothetically speaking, then when they load the page up, computer would say, okay, I'm rendering all of this stuff, and the value of this variable is muted is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But for us, we're not going to use numbers. We're just going to use booleans. And we are going to say that the value of is muted is going to be false. There we go. And the reason that we're doing that is just so that we can say, all right, when they click the page, is this going to be muted or not muted? And we were going to say, no, the page is not going to be muted on initial load. All right, so go ahead and semicolon there. And now we have our statement. So now that we have the state, though, we need to be able to access and set the state. And in order to do that, we're going to define a function called toggle. So can anyone remind me how we create functions in JavaScript?
You could do an arrow function.
Okay, how do I make an arrow function, Kasib?
Since you're already within a class, you can, as you have, write the name of the function and set it equal to whatever parameters you want for that function.
Okay, we'll leave no parameters for now.
Okay, well, since there's no parameters, after your close parentheses, you would do an equals and a what's that symbol called?
The greater than sign?
Oh, greater than sign, yes. And then from there you can write your function within curly brackets.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. All right, cool. So now, thank you for that explanation on fat arrow functions, Kasib. So we have the framework for our toggle mute function. And all we want this function, actually here, also I'm going to write down some comments. So this is going to say, I don't want to do that. I want to say, is the page muted? Initially, it is not muted. Now we have the toggle mute function. And the toggle mute function is going to change page from muted to unmuted and vice versa. So, how can we change the value of a state in React? There should be a function that lets us do this. Does anyone remember what it is?
Set state.
Okay, so do I just call it like this?
Oh, this dot set state.
So this dot set state, and then it says state any. So I need to tell it which states I want to change and how to do that. So what's the syntax of the set state function?
Usually you just do the key value pair and do the key and then colon whatever the new value is.
Yep. So here, I'm going to space it out just a little bit, just to make it a little more obvious. So you can just write is muted, right, which is the value from our state up here. So this state, this thing sets that state. We're going to say is muted. And how do I say that I want to flip the value of is muted as a Boolean?
The not operator.
Okay, so would that be NOT? Oh, it doesn't look like it's in the
Right,
list.
exclamation in JavaScript.
Yep. So exclamation mark, and then how do I get the current value of is muted?
I think it's this for instead of self dot state and then that the function.
Yep, so this dot state and dot
is
the
muted.
property. Yep. So to set state, we use the set state function and then set the key value pair. To get it, we just go to the state and then dot notation to get whatever state property we are looking for. And here, I'm just going to condense this a little bit more because I do not like how spaced out this is. But any questions about the set state function before we proceed? All right, I'm going to assume not. If anyone does, please let me know. So now we can also change our render function, right? Because the whole principle behind this exercise is to not just render your default JavaScript React page, but to React something slightly marginally cooler, which is the button. So how do I create a button in HTML? First, I'm just going to put this in a nice div, and we can call the class name. Yeah, that seems nice. So how do I create a button? Anyone remind me?
The button tag.
All right, so say button and see, is there anything else we should probably put?
An on click probably.
Yes. So the on click is going to change the value of is muted. So on click, and then we're going to put in curly brackets. Then we can say this dot toggle mute. And do I need to put any parentheses at the end of toggle mute? Or should we be okay?
You'll be okay.
Yep, yeah, we don't need parentheses at the end of toggle mute for this one. But we do need to close the button. And we can just say button. Cool. Now there's our button. Now we can do one more thing, which is just to make sure that everything works. We can also run a console log, and we can do this dot state dot. Actually, we can just print out the state. That should be fine. And all the way at the end, I want to make sure I have my export default app, which we do, which is perfect. So a semicolon there. And let's see, do we have any other things that look wrong? That looks pretty good. Does anybody have questions about what I've done so far? Okay, I'm going to assume no. So now comes the fun part. We get to test our release. How do I run an app in React?
npm start.
All right, so npm start. Uh-oh, it looks like it can't find my package.json file. That's interesting. Any idea as to why it might not be able to find it? If we look at the folder tree?
You would need to cd into your into the app folder. I believe that's where it should exist.
Yep, perfect. So that's why before I run something, I always like to hit the dir command, or ls works as well, to figure out where on earth I am in my directory. So as you can see, I haven't cd'd into the app directory. So we do that, and I'll type dir again, and my package.json is indeed present. So hypothetically, oh, wrong button. I should now be able to run npm start. Wait for it to get going. Okay, it's starting the dev server. And all right, now I just need to wait for my localhost 3000 to load. For some reason, it really likes to take a while for me. Okay, there we go. So let me go ahead and stop my share real quick and load up just the screen and share. Okay, so I have my localhost 3000 pulled up right here. I have our button in all its glory. And if I click the button, we should be able to see the state change. But I can't see the state change anywhere. This is slightly concerning. What do I have to do in order to see the state changing?
You can open your console so you can see things happening in there.
All right, how do I open the console?
The way I do it is with inspect, but I'm sure there are other ways. easier way.
Yep, no, inspect is pretty much the standard. So let's go inspect element, go console. Okay, that decided to happen, but that's all right. So right now, the value of is muted is true because I clicked the button once. If I click the button again, it says that is muted is false. I have no clue why it's console logging it twice, but the good thing is it's console logging. And if I click the button again, is muted becomes true and false and true and false, and we can keep doing this pretty much all day. So basically what's happening here, and I'm going to restart my share, go back into the app, and we will kill the server, terminate the batch job, and now this is going to stop working. Awesome. So what did we just do? Well, we created a button that when the button gets clicked, it will go up to the toggle mute function. And the toggle mute function will change the state, aka this is muted value, from whatever it was to the opposite. And we can just keep clicking the button and it'll keep flip-flopping it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth all day. So that's basically the premise of the exercise, but it's going to get a little bit more complicated from here. Does anybody have questions about anything I just did? Okay, I'm going to assume that we don't have any questions. So let's move on to the second part of this. So the first thing that we want to do is just like in Django, where we created individual folders for models and for templates and all that, we generally want to do the same sort of compartmentalization in React too. So if we go into our source page, our source folder, I'm going to create a subfolder of it called components. And we can go inside there, and I'm going to create a new file for my button. And I'm going to call that, actually here, I'll create another folder for it. We can call it mute button. And here, let me extend this a little bit. And then inside mute button, I can now create a mute button .javascript file. And again, let's all try following along with this. All right. So now the first thing that I like to do whenever I make a new file is tell people what this file is doing. So the mute button.js file is basically going to describe mute button code. Or we don't even need to describe it. We can just say mute button code because that's all this file will do. Now, we're going to continue to use class-based components here. So as I believe it was Matthew stated, we want to import React from React, and it does that quite automatically with the nice autofill. And now I'm going to write a class, and I'm going to call it mute button. And this class is going to extend React.component, open it up, semicolon, and then we always want to, well, not always, but generally we want to export default mute button. So that way other people can use and other files can use our class. Okay, so for the mute button, the gist of what we want our button to do is say, if button is clicked, say on. If button clicked again, off. That's just about it. So how can I start to code this? Or to back up a step, I guess. what do I need to do inside of my class in order to get it from just an empty class to something that might be able to display or render a button?
Just have to do
And-
render again.
Yep. So we're going to do render and this here. So what do I want to do? Oh, no, sorry. One, delete, come on, delete. There we go. And all right, I've got my curly brackets. So now let's look at the top here, right? So I have a little if. We have two if statements almost. And well, what did you know? If statements are also a thing in JavaScript. Hooray. So I can just write a really, really simple if button is clicked, and we'll fill that in using code. Then here we're going to say display on button. And we could do an else and say display off button. So let's start with how can we display a button?
CSS.
I would say that would be for formatting a button. But buttons are HTML components, right? So how do we get an HTML component to show up from JavaScript? And we just did this in the app.js class.
To make it show up, it should just be less than sign, button, and greater than sign, and then you close it, right?
All right, so I just say button like this.
The display button. Mhm.
Okay, so that would work if this was in the HTML. But we need to get the HTML out of the JavaScript and into the web page. In order to do that, we need to, there's a function that I'm looking for.
Return.
Yes, return. So we can return off button. Here we can return an on button. All right. And let me just double check that the format is good. Probably put semicolons over here. So how do we figure out if the button has been clicked?
I pass the state down as props.
All right. So how can I pass a state down as a prop?
You have to import button as a component of app.js and give it the props.
Okay, but that's the stuff that happens in app.js. That's one step ahead. But I can't just say if button is clicked and leave it this way in my mute button.javascript file. So what do I write in here that relates to props somehow before we implement it in app.js?
It's this dot props that is muted.
Yep.
So we
This
call
dot props. Yes. So it'll be if this dot props dot is muted, and we'll use our handy dandy triple equals true function. That was a weird noise that my computer just made. Okay, anyway, then we can display our on button. And otherwise, we display the off button. So there's nothing else that we really need to set up in our mute button.js. But what do we need to do in app.js now that we have mute button set up?
I think we have to import the mute button into the app.
All right, sweet. So importing the button. How do I import a button?
You just on somewhere in the top, you type in import, and then the file name, which is mute button from, and then the link, which is yeah, there you go.
Yep. So this is when autofill is really helpful.
And then you add .js at the end because you're linking the file.
So you actually don't really need to add the .js at the end. And you can, but it's not required. Interesting.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. But there's one more thing that we're missing. Or not necessarily missing, but something that can make it a little bit easier. So you see over here, we keep saying class app extends react.component. We don't have to keep saying the react dot. Instead, we can just do react and then also say we want to include a subclass component. So that way we can just refer to component on its own, which I think is great. And let's see, is there anything else that we should change here? So to recap, again, we've made a new directory called components. We created another one inside components for everything related to the mute button. And we created a mute button.javascript file that has our code for the mute button. If the button is clicked, aka if is muted is true, we're going to say it's on. Otherwise, we're going to say it's off. And we can go back to our app.js. We imported React and we imported component. We imported the mute button, and we've got the class app extending our component. Okay, so now there is one more thing that we have to do. This button is just called button. How can I change it so that this isn't a normal button, but so that this is the mute button that we designed?
You replace that with bringing in your mute button component in there.
Yep. So we go mute button, and then do I just keep everything else the same like this? Or are there other changes I have to make?
I think that's where the props go to, like you name the same name you used for props dot is muted. I think you put that as a name, and then equal that with the state, I believe.
Yep, exactly. So here, let's correct this a little bit more. So basically what we're doing here is we're saying custom component, and we're saying prop name equals prop value. That's about all we're doing. And what does this do? Well, it tells the computer, hey, I have a custom thing. That custom thing is called mute button. And they'll say, okay, mute button comes from this file. All right, so that's this class, which is going to create either an on button or an off button. And so you're like, okay, that's great. What do I do with this? Then we're going to go give them a prompt. We're going to say, hey, I want to pass in the is muted prompt. And it'll say, okay, how do I use is muted? Well, if is muted is true, then it's on. If it's false, then it's off. And they're like, okay, that's great, but I don't have a value for is muted. And then that's where we come in with the curly brackets and say, but we do have a value. And the value for is muted is the toggle mute function, which sets our state. So when we are importing in custom components like this from other JavaScript files, this, and we're going to use them in HTML, this is the general form that we're basically always going to use. So does anybody have questions about how we do that? Okay, I'm going to assume no questions. So let's go ahead and test this out. So again, one thing that I always like to do and that I highly recommend is whenever you make a big change, A, make sure all your files are saved and that you have backups. But B, test it out in the browser and see what happens. So we can go ahead and do our npm start. And now we just need to wait for localhost to load. And while it does that, I'm going to stop my share and wait for the browser to start working. Cheers. Okay, localhost loading. And let's go ahead and go to our inspect and go ahead and make this bigger. Got my off button there. I'm in the console. It says is muted is false. And is anyone else having this really weird problem where when you click the button, nothing's happening?
Yeah, mine did the same exact thing.
Interesting. Okay, so it looks like something might be wrong with our code then. Is anyone else having this problem, or is anyone else's clicking function able to work? I'm going to go back and share my VS Code. So let's go ahead and terminate the batch job and figure out what on earth just happened.
Props didn't get passed down.
Yep, it did not actually get passed down correctly. So we passed down the is muted function or the is muted prompt. Oh, no, I do not want the gitignore file. Nobody wants the gitignore file. All right, let's go back here. So just like we passed down the prompt for is muted, we also need to pass down toggle mute. This guy. Because toggle mute at this time does not actually exist as a handler inside of mute button. So I can't just say, I can't put it like, for example, an on click inside mute button, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. And instead of doing that, we also have to pass the whole function down. So I'm going to change the format of this a little bit. And we're going to say mute button is muted equals this. And we're going to go to the state all the way up here and pull down is muted. And then in addition to that, we also need to bring in toggle mute. And for that is a little bit easier. Thankfully, we can just say this toggle mute. No one. So again, and so what we had before was mute button is muted equals this toggle mute. But that doesn't work because we can't pass down a handler, an event handler directly with a React component. So we have to pass down the individual functions associated with the event handler. So questions about that?
No, can you repeat that again? I'm sorry, I got lost there.
No worries. So let me go ahead and comment this line out. I'll just say wrong. And the reason that this is wrong is because we can't pass down an event handler like the toggle mute function within a React component like that. So we can't just treat is muted like an on click, for example. And because of that, we have to pass down the state stuff separately, and the state changers or functions separately too. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions about this? I know it's a little bit confusing, but basically everything just needs to be separated out and sent out separately. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this wrong thing. So that way we don't have to come back and see that ever again. And the next thing that we need to do is now we've written our code mostly correctly, or so I'd like to think. And the next thing that's on our list is figuring out how to access toggle mute inside of not the app, but the mute button. So we can keep the function mostly the same, right? We've got our import React from React, we've got our mute button class, we've got our buttons, but the buttons don't do anything right now. And that's because they're not linked to the toggle mute function. So how do I pull the toggle mute function from whatever was in app.js to the mute button? What do I have to do? And I'll give you a hint. If we look here, we can see that is muted equals stuff in curly brackets, and toggle mute is also equal to stuff in curly brackets. Does that mean that we maybe access them similarly in the mute button class as well? What do you all think?
Yeah, we could probably set that to the on click, since this stop props, whatever that is, would be the function.
Yep, so we're going to set on click and then set this dot props. And if we go to this dot props, then how can I bring in the function from here?
Dot toggle mute.
Yep, so again, we just literally type the name. Just like we did for the this dot props that is muted, we just say this dot props dot toggle mute. That's all. And we do the exact same thing for button number 2. All right, any questions about that before we test it? All right, so let's go ahead and try testing it. I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share for a second while it tries loading up my browser again. And I do not know why it likes to take so long. Share. Come on. Okay, we've got off. I'm going to go down to, where did my inspect go? Inspect. There we go. Open up my console. Go ahead and keep, so we can see is muted is currently false. And look at that, our button works. So now is muted equals true and it's on. Off is false, on is true. And we can just keep playing this game all day. But before I move forward, does this not work for anybody in the audience at this time? Or does anyone have questions about why this works? All right, so we only have a couple more steps for things that we're going to do tonight before I send you all off in your individual groups. So we got the button working, which is great. But now it would be nice if we did more interesting things than dealing just with the button. Like, no, we can't really see the SVGs, but can we see the SVGs? Not particularly. Oh, that's right. But anyway, we have off and on icons now, which, let's be honest, are way cooler than people just writing off and on. That's a little bit boring. So one of the last things we're going to do today is display the images and our SVG icons instead of the text. So the first thing that we need to do is move this icons thing into source. I'm going to hit yes. And the reason that we need to do that is because React is only going to compile and access and use the files within the SRC or source folder for our purposes for right now. You can make it more complicated later and bring in stuff from other directories and so on. But for simplicity's sake, and also just because React will play a little bit more nicely, we're going to move the icons folder into our source directory. And we can import images the exact same way that we imported React components. So here, let me go ahead and space this out a little bit. So if we look in, for example, let me end this and terminate the batch job. So if we were to look inside, let's say, off.svg, let's go ahead and see if we can find our little icon here. Where are you? Okay, it doesn't want to find it. Anyway, so this is what your SVG off looks like. It is a bunch of XML, which is markup language, and a lot of different coordinates and shapes and SVG tags, and so on and so forth. Now, the way that we can import this, and we can say import, I think the lecture material calls it like an on icon and off icons, and say from, and then there's a lot of stuff that we can import from. But what I'm going to say is we can import from, let's see, if we're in this folder, we need to go up to the mute button, and then we're going to go up one more time. Then we can go to icons, and I can import this one from on.svg. And we'll do the exact same thing for off. And let me put my semicolons there, and I'll call this guy the off icon. And that should probably import them okay. So now that I have my images as SVGs imported, what I can do, and I can change from whatever I had as my button to an image. And the way that I can do this, I can say, all right, I want to include an image instead of the text in my button. How do I do that? Well, I have to set the source of the image. But instead of setting the source as like an HTML link using quotes, we're instead going to set it as our icons, like so. And so, yeah, that should pretty much do it. Or here, we can actually just do this. And we can do the exact same thing down here. Let's get back and change this guy to the off icon. So, well, again, to recap, on icon is getting imported from our on.svg file. In our image source here, that's going to replace our on and off words with the icons. And that should pretty much do it. But just to make sure, run through this one more time, npm start, wait for my browser to realize that I would like to run something, and if it could wake up, that would be fantastic. And let me reshare my screen. Okay. That's an interesting error. Let's see. Namespace. React and set throw if namespace false. To bypass this warning. All right. Is anybody else getting this error as well?
I am, yes, sir.
I did a quick Google search and it looks like in our SVG files, we need to change like where it says XML and S or whatever, and then a colon, and then Xlink, you have to change the way it's formatted. You don't use the colon anymore. You use like the capital letter, you do camel case it.
Interesting. All right, here, let me
And
go
then it
ahead.
works.
Okay, that's good to know. So sorry, where are you seeing the camel case part?
It's not camel case yet, but there, the XML, NS, colon,
This guy?
sketch, those two, both of those, you got to take out the colon and make it just a capital S for sketch, and then like camel case those two words. Yep, and the same.
Interesting. All right, let's see. It decided to throw
And that's it in the
another
other
error.
file too. The on.
That would explain it. All right, let's see if this will do it. Sketch and Xlink. Hooray! All right, it looks like the error went away. If we go back, ta-da! We have a nice auth. And again, I'm just going to open up the console with my inspect elements. Console is muted as false, is muted as true. Okay, well, that should have been flipped. But in any case, the on and off button works, which is fantastic. So yeah, that is basically the gist of how we can do toggly stuff and insert images via SVGs into React. And Tiffany, thank you for the absolute save with the quick Google search of the camel case.
You're welcome. I knew it would take a minute to find that. Actually, no, it wouldn't. If you just searched that error, that was the first thing that came up. So
Nice. Well, it's always a good thing when Stack Overflow's first solution actually solves it. So let's take maybe would you guys okay, so there's maybe 15 minutes at the very most left in lecture today. So would you guys prefer to take a 5-minute break and then do the 15 minutes? Or do you want to do the 15 minutes now?
I
I'd
have
say
no preference.
through, if that works with everybody.
I'm okay with keeping going, but
All right. Is there anybody who would like to take the break first in that case? Okay. If anyone would, feel free to do so. But we're going to keep trooping on. So we now have a working toggleable on-off button in React that goes back to change the state and accesses it through props, and also has some kind of nice images to go along with it. So we have a lot of code, and this code is not necessarily the most effective. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So the first thing is we have this like if else statement here, which is nice, except this statement and that statement are basically the same. So I'm going to change this to off and this to on. Nope, I want to quit this. Yes. Okay, so now the buttons should not be. But Switch these two to off and on. Awesome. All right. So once again, the code in this return statement and that return statement are almost identical, except one has off and one has on. How can I combine this if-else statement into something way shorter? There's a specific operator that I'm thinking of us using.
Like the ternary operator.
Perfect. So how do I use a ternary? Or,
I
okay,
think,
maybe, oh, go ahead.
I don't quite remember, but I think you do the condition that you want it to be true, then question mark, then the else statement, I believe. I don't remember.
Yep, no, that's correct. So we'll keep our button code in there. And so for the ternary, we're going to have condition. Then we have colon. We have if true. And then I think afterwards, oh, no, sorry, it's question mark. And then colon, and then it is the if false. Basically. So our condition is going to be, hey, is this thing muted? If it is muted, then we display the image source as our icon for off. And if it's not muted, then we just display it if it were on. And with that, we can delete the if statement. We can delete this guy. And we don't even need this guy. So that trims down our code by a decently healthy chunk. So that's one of the main improvements that we can make. Let's see. The second thing that we can also do is help to combine some things together. So we keep referring to like this dot props dot toggle mute and this dot props dot is muted. And we could easily have like 30 something props. Well, not easily, that would be a little bit much, but it's still entirely possible. Would you really like to keep typing this dot props, this dot props, this dot props throughout your entire JavaScript file? I mean, if you'd like a keyboard exercise, you're more than welcome to, but it's a little bit of a pain. And it's also just like visually redundant too, which isn't great. So instead of that, what we can do inside our render function is we can just pull the props out. So we can do, again, we pull the props out using this dot props, and we have two props. If we go back to our app.js, so we have our is muted prop and our toggle mute. So instead, what we can do is we can define a constant, and we can define this as a set of two key value pairs. We can say one is muted and one is going to be toggle muted. I'll set that equal to this dot props. Now, what does that do? Well, toggle mute is now equal to this dot props dot toggle mute, and is muted, this guy, is equal to this whole thing. So we can just replace it by saying button on click instead of this dot props dot toggle mute, button on click toggle mute, and this dot props dot is muted. That's about it. So that really helps increase our readability of the function. So again, if we gonna copy paste this, so here I'm just gonna make a new window, paste it in, and I'm just going to undo everything so we can see just how much messier the old code was. Okay, yeah. So here, let me see if I can zoom out just a little bit. So we can see in terms of overall length that, oh, here, actually, this one can be shorter. I just decided to add a bunch of extra space. Let's remove these, remove that, remove that, remove that. Yeah, there we go. So in terms of overall space, this really simple refactor literally removed like, okay, we can take out a good amount of this space too. It removed like 30% of all our overall lines, which is huge. A. B, we aren't repeating this.props or the image source a bunch of times. Instead, we have pulled our props into individual variables that can be reused on their own. And we've taken this really clunky looking if-else statement that reuses return and button and image source into a nice, quick, simple ternary that is embedded within our return statement. So it really helps improve not just our readability, but also it makes it a little bit easier for us to understand exactly what's going on. So that was a quick bit of refactoring that I think could be helpful. Let's see, anything else? I think the guide for today does go through functional components, which, if you'll remember, is what React also likes to use. It's important to be able to code in both functional and class-based components because they're both heavily relied upon in React and JavaScript development in general. But I would personally say I like the class-based functions or class-based components a little bit more because they're nice and easy to reuse. They've got your nice props and render methods. And they're slightly more standard, in my opinion, than the functional components. But that being said, functional components are also pretty importantly used. So don't forget those. And I think we go through the guide. Yeah, it does say after each of your exercises, if you have time, feel free to refactor your code using the functional components as well. Yeah, that's about it for lecture today. Does anyone have questions, comments, concerns?
I have a question. Wouldn't it probably be better practice to do all of our, like our toggle mute and all that inside our mute button component typically? Is there a reason why we're doing it outside in the app? And then, like, I don't know. I felt like I would have put all that within the component itself instead of passing in props.
So normally you'd be correct that you don't really want to pass in props unless you have to, and keeping everything within the component is nice. However, the point of today's exercise was to get you guys a little bit more familiar with props, which is why they want you to pass it back and forth.
I was just making sure that was the reason why we did that,
Yep.
not that that's something we should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, if this was something where the only time I would be ever using the is muted thing was for the button, then I would just keep that housed within mute button. However, if I have the is muted button, but that state is not just relegated by the button, but that state is also related to like the background color of the page, or I don't know, like displaying various graphics or something like that. Then, or if it's being used in another part of the app, then I might think about using that as a prop. But otherwise, I would just keep it within the button if this were a non-prop directed challenge, if that makes sense.
Yep, thanks for clarifying.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, can you show again the edits that you made on the off .svg to make it work? I thought I made
Sure.
it myself, but it's
Oh, whoa. Okay. Apparently, I decided to close my entire VS Code somehow. So give me 2 seconds while it decides it wants to reboot. Hopefully, quickly. Come on. Wake up. There we go. All right. So if you go to the long links pages over here in your SVGs. Oh, no. All right, that's really annoying. Right now, or before, it had XMLNS colon sketch and XMLNS colon xlink. What we need to do is change these, so removing the colon and the letter, and change the letter to camel case, so capo. So it would be XMLNS capital xlink, and for the sketch, it would be XMLNS capital sketch, like so. So does that make sense? Any questions?
So I changed mine, maybe after the break or whatnot, but it's, I made the changes on both of my off and on files, and I don't think it worked. But
Okay. Would you like to maybe share your screen and we can group debug it if you'd like?
sure. Hold on.
All right, so let me stop my share and feel free to put yours up whenever you'd like. And also, I'm editing this in the official course files as well, so that way future students hopefully should not have this problem.
Okay, here we go. I'm thinking I missed something else, but as you can see, I'm on my off and on, and I did change in here and in here on both files. So here and in here, I'm still getting an error.
I think I have a hunch why. Can you go to, let's say mutebutton.js for me?
Okay.
All right, so let's look at the error messages itself. So it says module not found, and it says that it can't resolve this file path. So, and if anyone else would like to jump in here as well and maybe help out, please feel free. But the first question I'll ask the group and Chris as well. What is the error within this file path? Which very coincidentally, or not coincidentally, are the same file paths up here.
Mm-hmm.
Give the hint. The difference is 1 character between what it is and what it should be.
That's always the case with me too. Oh my god. Icons on SVG. Icons on SVG.
And yeah, if anyone else would also like to weigh in, please feel free.
Take away
Sure.
one of the dots at the beginning.
He's got icons dot on dot svg. It should be a /.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same. That's actually the end of the path should be at the end of icons, and then the file name. So that should be as /.
Yeah. So you're gonna want to replace this guy and that guy with slashes. And that should hopefully solve your problem.
Yeah, there you go.
I didn't see it.
Hooray!
Yeah, I was looking hard too, so I didn't see it anywhere. I was like, what are they
Thank you.
talking about?
Thank you. This is always the case with me, so I appreciate the input there. Thank you.
Yep, again, these sorts of like really, really tiny syntax errors cause a lot of heartache for debuggers. But the first thing, then this is always why, this thing I always like to do whenever I get an error is I don't look at what I think the error is, but I look at what the error message itself is telling me the error is. So in your case, for example, when we saw that error message, the first thing that jumped to mind was, oh, it must be an error with the SVG file. But it's always important to take a real deep look at the error message, which wasn't telling us anything about the file. It was saying, hey, something's wrong with the path. And so going back to exactly what the error message says and read from there is something that I think will definitely help a good amount in the future.
Okay, thank you again. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions, comments, concerns, debugging problems, life facts?
Oh yeah, how would that ternary would have looked if you didn't have an else?
Didn't have an else. You could just leave the else part of it blank, actually.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That probably wouldn't do. Yeah, at least that's what I would do. Any other questions? All right. Give me 1 second as I am updating the GitHub so that other people don't have the same issue. Save. All right, sweet. So, again, there is a little bit of stuff in today's curriculum about destructuring, which is what I discussed briefly with the props. And there's a good amount of stuff there on functional components that I highly invite you all to read on your own time if you'd like. And I'm more than happy to help out as always. Tonight's challenge is state abbreviator. So yeah, let's go ahead. I'll share my screen real quick. This guy up. So we're going to keep experimenting with state, props, inputs, and arrays. You want to create your React app, basically doing the exact same thing that we just did, but slightly different. Move the state data directory into the root of this repo. And what is the state data, you may ask? Let's go index.js. So we have names and alpha2, which I'm fairly sure is just going to be alphabetical abbreviation with 2 letters. And we have this for every single state and the District of Columbia. So this is inside of your state data index. I'm going to put this into your SRC directory, import the data, construct a UI, bonus points if you create a pretty UI or add in some CSS. And as an extra challenge, if anybody can make the UI have a searchable list, that will be really interesting. Again, after release 2, not before, do not focus on this. But if anyone is willing to go the extra mile and wants to find a way to make the lists of state data searchable in your HTML, more than free to do that. Any questions about the state abbreviator challenge? All right, I'm gonna assume not. So hang on 1 second for me. I'm not gonna let you all go just yet. All right, so I need to make tonight's groups. Assuming that you all would still like to be in groups, is there anybody who would rather work alone tonight? Besides those of you who messaged me earlier. Sejan, okay.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, Elijah, I'll take you off the list as well.
Yeah, I have a sick baby,
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm bouncing in and out. Sorry.
No worries, all good. So we'll remove Cassie, Tiffany. Oh, whoa, a lot of people want to work on their own team.
I think we
right.
all like walking through it at our own pace.
Okay. Is there? Let me rephrase the question. Is there anybody who is really particularly like to be in a group today?
Would it be possible to maybe just later we all reconvene and just we can talk about it a little bit or go over it just a little bit before we end for the night?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. Usually I do try to do that around half an hour before class ends, but I know everyone gets tired, so we can probably push it a little earlier and do it at say 8:30, I guess. We'll give you guys like an hour and a half to work on it. How does that sound? Or would you prefer to just do it at 9?
8:30 sounds good to me.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Anybody very averse to the idea of 8:30?
I have a question about styling CSS. Is there a specific way, like specific to React, or because I've been doing it
Nope.
just inline and just whatever normal stuff. So there's no,
Yep.
but you can still create a static file and do all that.
Correct. Yep. So it's all, again, React at its core is just more JavaScript and HTML, but just a little bit fancier than basic JavaScript and HTML. So however you want to do your CSS, if you want to do it inline, if you want to do it in a separate CSS file, you want to use static files, if you want to import CSS from the web, anything goes.
Okay.
So that shouldn't cause any problems.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Alrighty. So if you guys want to hang out in the main room, feel free. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ping myself or Hyder, and we will pop around. If you want to go into a breakout room and work alone or with other folks, you're more than welcome to do that too. Any questions before we end this for tonight and let you guys work on problems? Okie dokes, gonna end the recording here.